Hello, and welcome to another episode of When She No Longer Wants to Cook for You, Here's What You Do, I'm More. And today we're back. We're back with another astonishing vegan episode with Kyle. Kyle, welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much,
Welcome back, welcome back. Now listen, before we start, I got to thank you on something.
Okay.
Because of you and that solid episode, I won my first award through Brick. So I want you to check that out.
Congratulations.
And that was because of you.
Okay.
You know, Brick has a lot of amazing talent. The Kyle segment could not be denied. It was so informative, and yet we're back again. So, learning vegan, that vegan journey, he's going to walk us through it again. 2 years later, we're back. What are we cooking today?
Okay, so we are going to be going with some veggie burgers.
Okay.
There is a cauliflower skewer.
Got you.
And a few other surprises along the way, so you guys are in for a treat.
Excellent. I was telling Kyle, I had three of my friends who actually saw his segment and was so motivated that they took that vegan journey.
I love hearing that.
Yeah. One of them kind of went back to the red meat and burgers and looking all greasy, but the other two, I'm not going to name them, they're still on that journey. And I love that because you walked us through that.
Yeah,
and
we'll address that today.
Yeah, and you've actually changed. There are two people out there whose lives you changed.
That's phenomenal.
So listen, enough of me talking. We got the fire going,
that's right.
Fan going. We out here, beautiful backyard. The wind is going. You're gonna hear it all.
We outside.
We outside, people. And so listen, when She No Longer Wants to Cook for You, Kyle, today vegan style is gonna show us what to do. People, we'll be right back.
Okay, welcome everyone, and it feels good to be back in more ways than one. I'm back in New York, right? This is now a couple of years since the last time we filmed, and there's been a lot of change, both on my end and just things going on all over. I'm now positioned, I think the last time we spoke, I was at Florida A&M University in Tallahassee. I'm now a tenure track faculty member, an architecture professor of critical design, futures, and computation at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. So big changes, and New York is still home for me, and I try to get back as often as I can so that we can make these kind of things happen. This show is phenomenal, and you guys are going to be with me as we talk about this vegan journey. There's a lot of things that we want to discuss health-wise. Veganism is very dense as a topic, and it's changed over the years. There's been so much that's gone into the technology, just the science that went behind veganism from its origins. We're talking about the 1980s, and so here we are, 2024, and people are really thinking about veganism in a lot of different ways. So we're going to get into everything from protein to supplementation to even the biochemistry behind the foods that we're eating, and really get into the science of what all this means, what it looks like to be part of this vegan journey. So today, I'm starting with the cauliflower skewer, which is, to me, plain and simple. I'm using the same equipment as I had as our last setup, using a Weber grill and a grill pan. And my favorite oil to use is avocado oil because it has a high smoke point temperature. And so my setup is usually with natural hardwood and natural charcoal because it gives that full flavor. So everything's really kind of being made together, keeping that whole natural vibe as I've tried to keep in my journey. So I'm just going to go ahead and throw a few of the skewers on the grill. And there's a really special sauce here that I'm going to tell you guys about, the ingredients of the sauce. And that should get us started here. So I'll just do a few at a time. And I'll go ahead and start to add the sauce. Now, this sauce has quite a few really great ingredients, and we made some prep to make sure that the sauce was going to be perfect for our shooting today. And so the primary ingredients are ginger, tomato paste. There are different types of peppers, serrano peppers, bell peppers, that all got chopped into here. And we're going to finish it off with a few other ingredients that we have, like green onions, as well as some sesame seeds. So I'm just going to go ahead and throw some of the sauce on the cauliflower as it's cooking here. And so we got a good temperature with the grill. There's always a bit of back and forth when we're looking at the charcoal and the actual hardwood that's going on the grill to make sure that you have that perfect temperature. I haven't switched to gas yet. I've been committed to my natural wood and charcoal process because it's worked for me. So I really have enjoyed and appreciated how that workflow has gone. But I'm already starting to smell the ginger, which smells so good, and the peppers. All right. Let's put this over to the side. And so now to update you guys, as I'm going to let this cook for a while. Yeah. So my last few years, I spent 3 years at Florida A&M University as an architecture professor, and I loved being back on a historically black university and college campus. Of course, Howard University, as I mentioned in my last shooting, was my alma mater, and Columbia University is my graduate alma mater. So being back at a place like FAMU was certainly a journey. It was a really good experience, and I saw so many really wonderful people, got to connect with some really great students. And so as a result, I've gotten a chance to really figure out what it is that I wanted to do, what I would call design agenda or research agenda is all about. And so we're really in the middle of this very critical time in history with technology. And so one of the big things that I found while I was teaching there was AI. AI in the last few years has blown up in a tremendous way. And so I became a professor who has presented at conferences. I presented at a conference in Querétaro, Mexico, which is about 2.5 hours northwest of Mexico City, very recently, actually, in June of this year. And we're actually on the last official day of summer for the year. So tomorrow is going to be the autumnal equinox. Usually when I do these barbecues, I try to do them around the change of seasons. I've done one on the summer solstice before, and here we are a day before the autumnal equinox. But so I've been doing this work with AI where I've taught students this very interesting drawing process that blends and merges jazz music, and they're taking songs that they're representing that I've given them and using AI to represent drawings in a very new and interesting way. And so architecture, AI, and jazz music have been my research agenda. And that, along with my vegan journey, have really been these pinnacles of really larger framework that I'm setting up for myself. So as we watch these cauliflower skewers cook ever so carefully, which are doing quite well, I'm happy with the result. I'm going to just start to update you guys as I was starting to explain that the cooking component is just a small part of this larger thing that we call veganism. Veganism is very much so about thinking about what it is that's going to be most ideal for you to break down in your body. All of the different foods, nutrients, minerals. I'm not adverse to meat, and I'm not somebody who's going to look at somebody who's a meat eater and say you're wrong for what you're doing. I get questioned all the time about what it is that I'm getting in terms of nutrients. Am I supplementing? And the reality of the situation is a vegan, just like everybody else, is going to need to have a lot of supplements in their diet. It's really a thing here where the nutrients in the soil, the types of plants that are growing out of the ground are not getting the type of nutrients that they always had in the past. And so as a result, we're going to have to create a relationship with supplementation in our diets. And so that's no different with vegans. There's a lot of different things that we need to make sure that we have regularly in a regular balanced meal. So when we think about what balance looks like, it's all about pigment, it's about hydration, there's a protein component, but most importantly, fiber, right? And so when we're eating meats have amino acids just like our plants and vegetable sources have amino acids. But one of the things that is an advantage of vegetables is that they have aromatic amino acids. And so that's actually a huge difference. So anybody who's going and switching into a vegan journey can make the decision to say, oh, okay, well, I'm just going to switch this out with that, right? So I know a lot of people, even myself, has been guilty of this, where I'm just saying, oh, well, I'm vegan now, so let me try to find all of the same ingredients that I would as a non-vegan. So if I like steak, I can find vegan steak. If I liked chicken, I can find vegan chicken. But if you're not getting all of the different colors of vegetables in your diet on a regular basis, you might as well just stick with actually eating meat. So that's one of the things that most vegans won't tell you, right? So it's not just trying to get everybody to convert to veganism. It really is a more holistic conversation around how you're balancing, as I mentioned, fibers, pigments. And pigments are going to get us into a larger conversation that we're going to have today about melanin. And that could be a potentially contentious conversation because people always think, well, some people have melanin, some people don't have melanin, and that is absolutely not true. Every single person has melanin in their systems. Melanin is important for a lot of reasons, but it is very big in providing nourishment for the body, right? But then when we think about melanin, it's not just one thing, right? There are three different types of melanin in the body. There's neuromelanin, which is part of the brain and neural network. There's pheomelanin, and so persons who are lighter complexion, lighter toned, have pheomelanin or predominantly pheomelanin. And then there's eumelanin, so persons who are darker toned have eumelanin. So it's the combination of these three different types of melanin in the body that those pigments are working with to work with the heart and the brain, the metabolic system, to make sure that we are getting the types of nutrients all throughout the body. At this point, it looks like my first set of skewers might be ready to get off the grill. I'm happy with the result. I'm going to just kind of throw the next set of skewers here on the grill. So let me do this transition really quickly while we're having this conversation about pigments and melanin and protein and fiber, most importantly. So, as mentioned, if you are primarily a meat eater, you're going to be able to get protein in your system. And one of the big differences in the vegan journey, right, is that you're going to get amino acids from protein from direct sources. So when you're eating, let's say, food that's coming from meat, you're eating what that animal ate, right? And so let's say you're eating an animal that is herbivorous, then you're going to get the plant nutrition directly from that animal and what they ate. But let's say that you ate an animal that's carnivorous, a carnivore, right? Then you're going to eat what that animal ate, which might have been an herbivore. So the amino acids are coming from plants, no matter how you slice it or dice it. So then in your situation, you're not getting the amino acids that you need and the proteins that you need directly from the source. So it's great to be in a situation where, as someone who's vegan, you're getting these sources directly from the plants where they come from. And as mentioned, the aromatic amino acids are the ones you'll see a lot. People go for branched chain amino acids, for example, when they're going for protein. Myself, as someone who's on my fitness journey, and we'll talk about fitness today, I like pea protein. I like active proteins. There are proteins that come in powder form. Some people are big into the whey, but people don't realize that whey protein is actually a milk protein, so I really don't go that direction. But I'm also big on hemp hemp protein. So a mixture of the pea protein and hemp protein are really going to give me a lot of the different types of amino acids that I need in addition to my food sources. So when it comes to foods, and one of the surprises, I'm going to give it up early, one of the surprises that we're going to make today is a bean salad. Now that's going to get prepared off camera, but I can't mention enough the value and the importance of just the entire bean family. So not just, I know we heard persons like Dr. Sebi talk a lot about chickpeas. Chickpeas are important. I also heard a lot of people like Elijah Muhammad, Honorable Elijah Muhammad, talk about navy beans. But persons with high concentrations of melanin in their system are going to need all different types of melanin, beans. Not just navy beans or chickpeas, but we're talking about the entire kingdom of beans is actually referred to as pulse. So pulse is going to include peas, legumes, right? So that's going to really broaden the horizon. But these are where you're going to get a lot of your direct proteins and aminos. And so that's really going to be important to have in major quantities in your diet. So another thing that people like to do is when they're eating their meat, they're going to put a lot of condiments on the meat. And so when you're doing that, you're not going to get the full nutritional value out of that meat. So when we're eating meat, what we're doing is we're eating the muscle of the animal that was prepared for you. And so that's where you're getting the aminos, is from the muscle, from that animal. But if you're going to put condiments on, then the condiments are going to put all different types of sugar and salt into what was already prepared. Now, in the scenario that we're describing now, I'm just going to put a little bit more of my high smoke point avocado oil on the grill here. As I start to explain, and a little bit more of this really nice sauce. I might put the last set of skewers back on because I didn't have a whole lot of sauce on those, but yeah, let me just pour that on there. And that smells really good. Okay. So I was starting to explain this relationship between meat eaters who are putting condiments on their meat because they may not actually like the flavor of the meat by itself, right? But something like hummus or tahini, so hummus is coming from chickpeas, tahini, which is coming from sesame seeds, are going to give you a load of nutrients, a load of minerals. So when I was talking about the family of nuts and pulse, legumes, peas, beans, let's think about, let's say, pumpkin seeds, for example. They're going to give you a lot of zinc. If we're going to look at sunflower seeds, something so simple, you're going to get your quercetin, right, which is very important. If you're going to have, let's say, Brazil nuts, that's where you're going to get a lot of selenium, right? So these are things that I'm regularly making sure I have in my diet. I'm also someone who is a strong proponent for oats, right? So oats are going to not only give you a load of nutrients, but then for not just men and women, you're going to get testosterone from oats. And so as we age, that's something that then starts to decrease the levels of testosterone, right? So when we talk about hormones and hormone balancing, right? So my morning every day is going to look like a mixture of some of those protein powders that we discussed. I'm going to have some oats. I'm going to have a few different types of berries, right? And for me, a big thing has been, and we talked about this in the last episode, sea moss, right? And that's where you're going to get your collagen. Collagen is super, super important. There are a lot of different places you can get collagen, but algae is an excellent source of collagen, right? And so I'm getting that from a sea moss, and I can talk later on about exactly what sea moss that I'm purchasing and using and putting into my breakfast that I'm having. But that already is loaded with a series of pigments. I'm actually adding a host of herbs, all the Dr. Sebi herbs, plus some other herbs that I think are super, super important for the body, or know they're super important for the body. So this whole biochemistry of the body is coming into play as we think about this larger system that is our body. And with that, we'll be right back. And we're back. So as you can see, we ended up finishing up the work with the very, very magnificent cauliflower here. So I'm presenting that to you guys. And so what I ended up doing is that special sauce that we discussed earlier. I topped the skewers with green onions that I chopped up off camera, and I also added some sesame seed, which is something that I mentioned, right? So these are all nutrients that we need in the body. Now, one of the surprises, and I talked a lot about beans and pulse in the first segment, is that I have a bean salad here. And so that's another one of the dishes that's part of the meal. Now, of course, I'm not grilling that, right? So this is made separately. But some of the items in the bean salad include chickpeas, there are kidney beans, there's some cilantro, but it's loaded with pigments. It's loaded with not only amino acids and proteins, but digestive enzymes. So that's another really important thing about our food, is the enzymes that are within it, right? And so as we're thinking about this holistic conversation surrounding what it is that it looks like to be whole and complete in your diet, right? We were discussing the extent to which the muscles are a part of this system, right? So we've got three different types of muscles. Some of you guys might know this, but you have your skeletal muscles, which are the ones that are on the outside. You also have your smooth muscles, which are primarily your organs, and then you have your cardiac muscle, right? And so all of these different systems together require a ton of protein and aminos to keep your system moving regularly. One of the other components of the journey and just being healthy in general is hydration. So we need to make sure we're getting a lot of water in on a daily basis, because we have basically like a hydroelectric water mill going through our system every single day, right? So we have got the fascia of the skin and of the muscles that basically need to rid your body, rid your cells of waste material. And so while you are in the process of getting the vitamins and nutrients, as I talked about, greens are really important. You're gonna get your vitamin K there, right? But fitness from the standpoint of exercise then becomes another part of cleaning your fascia, cleaning your body. So yes, there's the sort of exterior cleanliness, but then the actual internal cleanliness, that is a part of this larger conversation of these sort of three different muscle systems: skeletal, smooth, and cardio, right? And so as we bring back this conversation around melanin, like we were discussing neuromelanin, right, which is affecting your neurological system, that actually connects most closely with your dopaminergic neurons, right? And so those have to do with addiction, right? And so, or the things that we like to have the most of, so the things that we're going to have the most proclivities towards. And so that's why I was mentioning things like condiments. So in my case, right, I'm going to put a hummus, I'm going to put a tahini, rather than putting, let's say, a ketchup or a barbecue sauce on some of the things that I'm cooking, right? Because if you're just rubbing, let's say, meats with all these different sauces, you're not going to get the full nutritional value of the protein. So you're hearing a vegan tell you that you are getting nutrients from meat too, right? But what it really boils down to is the aromatic amino acids that you're going to get. So if you're going to have meat, you're going to have it balanced out with your greens, with all these different pigments coming from peppers, coming from pulse, all these different beans, as we talked about earlier, right? But now that we're on the topic of fitness and well-being, right, we want to discuss, so my fitness journey has been quite interesting, right? I am somebody who spent time in martial arts. I also spent time in yoga. So I think in the last time that we shot, in the last episode, I talked about being a member of a kickboxing gym in Tallahassee. And so I was part of this gym called 9 Round Tallahassee, and they've got about 600 locations worldwide, and they've started to make a connection with Karate Combat in recent years. Their owner, Shannon the Cat and Hudson, has really taken the idea of kickboxing to a whole new level. And so that's been my sort of go-to martial art. But in between kickboxing, I put in actually 500 workouts in the last 3 years at that one gym. But I had also picked up jiu-jitsu last summer, so I was working at a jiu-jitsu gym, not working, but training at a jiu-jitsu gym last summer with some really great NYPD cops. So I'm going to shout out Win Jiu-Jitsu here in Massapequa, New York. So I spent some time training with those guys, right? But on your own, it might not be that you're led towards martial arts. But I mean, one of the things that I really enjoy doing, and I have about 8 years of experience of being involved in yoga, the practice of yoga, which is all about quieting the chatter of your mind. And so any type of stretching, I know true yogis are not going to like the idea of hearing yoga being compared to stretching, but there is some stretching that goes on with the static movements that go on in that type of tradition. And so, as I mentioned, I've got a load of experience in that practice. It wasn't something I did a whole heck of a lot of in Tallahassee, but now moving into Charlotte, it seems like it might be something I'll have a chance to interface with just a little bit more. The building that I've moved into has a really great fitness space, so I'm trying to get into the gym, let's say 3-4 times a week. When I was kickboxing, 7 days a week. Now that's on the extreme level, but again, right, when we thought about veganism some decades ago, it was always this picture of a person who's just super, super slim. And that's not okay. That's actually not good. We have to actually prioritize muscle, and muscle, not necessarily like a bodybuilder, right? If anybody's seen anything about blue zones, so these are zones in the world where people have lived the longest. Those are individuals who are finding this balance. Now, there are not a lot of vegan blue zones left, right? So that doesn't necessarily mean that the vegan diet is gonna like make you last forever long, right? But what you will see is that some of the commonalities between the blue zones is that a lot of the persons who are in blue zones or live in blue zones have a lot of back-breaking work. They're out and they're exercising, they're in the sun, getting that vitamin D. They're also primarily plant-based. So if anything that you're hearing from what I'm saying today is that a plant-based diet or having a lot of plants supplemented into your diet is going to be super important, right? But the far extreme is going to be the bodybuilders, right? So bodybuilders are going to be the persons who have a load of muscle, and it's important to have muscle. Like the more muscle that you have, the more you're going to be able to heal when your body needs to. So for example, right, if you're dealing with disease, the body uses the muscle in order to create more veins, more arteries, more miles of those networks within your system. So that, along with water and hydration, are really going to help you with preventative disease and even through the curing process. But one of my mentors in the health journey has said that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of curing, right? And so when we think about supplements and supplementation, a lot of people will then say, oh, well, that means that you're going to go and take a lot of different vitamins, aftermarket products, maybe even processed products that are coming from the pharmaceutical industry. Whereas all of our foods are actually considered chemicals. Like, I mean, that's something that a lot of people have moved away from conversationally, but the reality of the situation from a biochemical standpoint, the nutrients that you're getting from, let's say, a plant-based diet, if we broke them down into chemicals, right, the pharmaceutical industry is then learning from what it is that we, as persons who have been doing this for however long, eating plants, have figured out, right? So they're saying, well, we know that there are certain vitamins in this food or in this herb, and they're converting that into something that we might intake, right? So one of the hidden secrets that I mentioned probably in the last episode was mushrooms, that mushrooms are really important. There's all different types of mushrooms, and some are stronger than others, just like there are some algae and sea mosses that are stronger than others, and sea vegetables, right? But you're going to get a lot of redox, right? So everyone knows that people will talk about antioxidants, we'll talk about minerals, we'll talk about vitamins and other types of nutrients, right? But the process of redox in the body is something that you're only going to get from a few different places, like mushrooms. So as I did mention that I'm getting a lot of fruits in my diet, and so berries are super important to what it is that I have very regularly, but I also have melons, right? But I'm not having them together, right? So there are some foods that you can mix, certain fruits that you can mix, but it's also important to separate the different types of foods. Bananas are going to be loaded in potassium, and why that's important, right? And I think about people just say, okay, yeah, potassium, I need that in my system, but potassium is actually the counterbalance to sodium. So there is such thing as a good salt. Like, we're not saying that every single salt that you have is bad, right? So you've got sea salts, Himalayan crystal salt, are really, really important for your system. So it's good to have a good balance of salts. Whereas, right, if you've had too much salt, there's too much sodium in your system, something like a banana, something like potassium is going to counterbalance that sodium that's in your system. So it's really just kind of a give and take. And so while we're on this conversation of fitness, let's just talk about the piezoelectric circuitry that is just your skeletal system in and of itself, right? If we're really thinking about what the maximum type of fitness would be for anybody just joining this journey, looking at food, looking at diet, looking at lifestyle, jumping rope is one of the best exercises for you, because what it does is it compresses the bones, and the bones are like crystals in a watch, where when you're wearing a watch, that energy that's keeping the actual components ticking is very, very similar to how the bones in our body work. And so as we're, let's say, jumping from jump rope or on a trampoline or doing jumping jacks, that's loading up the body with inertia and energy that's getting converted into a load of different systems. And so that's why part of this kind of cleaning your body, cleaning your fascia, and moving waste material out of your body along with hydration are really a big part of this larger thing that we call health and well-being and lifestyle. So as we think about it, push-ups seem so simple, and we talk about it from time to time, but a recent study was put together with some Harvard scientists that realized that if you can do a certain amount of push-ups within a minute, I believe it's about 40, you're actually 90% less at risk for heart disease. So that's a big, big, big deal. And so now we're realizing that we're going to try to do more push-ups on a daily basis. And that's just simple calisthenics. Now, there are plyometric workouts, and as I mentioned, there's martial arts. But if we can look at metabolic diseases, from diabetes to obesity to heart disease, right? Some of the things of a plant-based diet is that we're addressing all of these different factors straight on, right? And so this now started to dovetail into my own personal work. So I mentioned AI and jazz and architecture, and even the furniture that I talked about in episode 1, which I'm back into. So we'll talk about my furniture making. But one of my most recent studies, a research study that I'm doing with a course I'm teaching next semester, which is called the Community Planning Workshop, which is going to be a combination of some graduate students and urban design students, architecture students. It's actually it's co-listed with a geoengineering program or geoscience program. And so I will have students from a lot of different backgrounds. And so that class, I brought in a community partner, and I will kind of finalize things once things are formalized. But in a future episode, we could talk about how this went. But I found a local farm in Charlotte, North Carolina, that is a black-owned company. It's a family-owned company that has 7 acres, an urban farm, and they, although they are not vegan, and their type of cultivation in their farm includes livestock in addition to plants and vegetables. They're very much so about organic as opposed to GMO, right? And so that's super important when we're thinking about the journey, right? And so I'm going to be teaching with students, going to let them look at the farm, look at the space, and think about planning opportunities for more people to get involved in this idea of urban farming. Like when you're in a dense urban environment, how can you grow? How can you cultivate all these different types of plants? And so if we can bring that into the conversation with design students, it's taking what initially started with these backyard barbecues like we're having now on the day before the autumnal equinox into the classroom setting. It's going to continue to grow and blossom as we make a community toolkit to explain to others how we can replicate this process. But yeah, just one thing I did want to share, that on my journey, while I'm somebody who's going regularly to the supermarket to then look at these different items and make sure that I'm buying the right stuff, there's actually a certain ratio between the carbohydrates, the fats, the sugars, right, that we're going to see in the label of all the different types of foods. Now, of course, fruits and veg, you have to know some of this stuff ahead of time. Certain packaged goods like beans, if you can get canned beans, which is okay to some extent, right, it's going to tell you the ratio of what kind of nutrients are in the diet. But you want to make sure you, as a vegan, or if you're going to be in the vegan journey or primarily plant-based, need to make sure you're getting a lot of fats. So I'm getting that from coconut oil, I'm getting that from even olive oil, which has a lot of polyphenols. I use palm oil at times, cold pressed palm oil if it's organic, right? And so these are actually getting some of the fats into your system more regularly, which you need in addition to protein, so that's part of the balance. Whereas, right, you want to actually have a lower amount of sugar, and so that's something to just kind of keep in check, that ratio between kind of sugar, fat, protein. And so as you're going to the supermarket, you want to have these things in mind, and so that's really been a big part of my thinking. Now, I'm not somebody that goes really big on Beyond Meats or Impossible Burgers, right? Because these alternatives, textured vegetable protein, I talked about in the last episode that I'm not really big on soy, right? So that means that I'm gonna have to try to go out and see, like for example, we're gonna very soon cook veggie burgers. If I'm gonna cook a veggie burger, I like to make sure it has either beans or lentils as the primary protein versus, or even a pea protein, there are pea protein burgers, versus going out there and finding something that's super processed. And I'm not having a veggie burger every day, right? But it's something that I'll occasionally enjoy, especially in an occasion like this where we're getting together on a really nice day where we're getting our vitamin D supplies and recharging that melanin that we've been talking about, getting that vitamin D. So ultimately, yeah, the larger conversation here is being holistic all around. So from the fitness journey, which we discussed, to just thinking about our positive relationship to having a load of nutrients in our system, thinking about pigment, thinking about hydration, thinking about protein, amino acids, and primary sources of these aromatic amino acids, right? Because it's not enough to say, when we're consuming animals get sick just like we do. And when we're seeing that there are not a lot of nutrients in the plant system, right, then that means that the animals are eating those same plants, and so they get sick, they get diseased, and so they get loaded up with vaccines, they get loaded up with a whole lot of stuff that gets translated into your food. And so while we're thinking about what is positive for us to eat, when we're thinking about ways that we can get the maximum amount of nutrition, that's why I've really gone the plant-based journey. And that's not to say, I'm 4 years in at this point, and this is the longest time I've ever been vegan, and I'm vegan along with my queen, and she and I have been vegan together for 4 years. But there, let's say, would be once a year that I might try something that's outside of my vegan diet, and that's okay, right? And I don't ever feel bad about it, right? Some people will try a cheat day where they're just like, okay, maybe 6 days a week I'm eating plant-based, but every now and then I will try something that is outside of a primarily plant-based diet. So that's one way to think about the journey, is that it's a marathon, not a sprint. And so you have to really think about all the different ways that you can have a positive relationship to the foods that you're eating, that you can think about what it is that is on your plate, where it comes from, what are the nutritional values of the things that you are ingesting, right? And if we have this mindset, it creates this culture of generational health. If we're having these conversations with our friends, with our family, then it's something that can convert to other individuals. Now, that's not to say we're trying to convert the people to something different than they're already doing, but we're giving them perspective on other ways that they could do what it is that they're already doing. For example, for me, going to family events where I'm trying to tell everybody I'm vegan, or even coworkers, right? I will sometimes have to bring my own meal, so I could say, you guys can try this, or you could not. And 9 times out of 10, people really like the vegan food. It's not too different. It's something that it resonates with a lot of people because we're accustomed to having vegetables. But if you can have that regularly, if that's your primary diet, then what I've found is I've been able to keep myself at my highest energetic self, and that's been really important in finding my way in this lifestyle. And with that, we'll be right back. And we're back. So, in between this time, I've started the process of getting some veggie burgers together. As mentioned, I will sometimes do a store-bought burger, but a lot of times when I'm doing veggie burgers, I'm making them myself. So these veggie burgers are black bean burgers. And so what I'm gonna do here is throw the grill pan back on the grill, and I'm going to melt some cheese onto the already cooked burgers. So the time to make a veggie burger is not quite as long as it would take for a meat burger, because you're not having to wait until all of the ingredients then have to get cooked through. So that's one of the advantages of vegetables, is that in a way they're already ready. Now, talking about best practices, it's always best to have a vegetable that's uncooked. So I'm really big on raw food, raw and living ingredients. So I'm huge on sprouts. So when we top these burgers, we're going to top them with some sprouts. And so you're going to see us go through that process. What I'm doing now is melting, this is vegan cheese, and there are ways to make your own vegan cheese. I've done it quite a few times, and I think it's good, right? Now, a lot of the cheeses are made from nuts and seeds, and so those are super nutritious. It's processed though, so you have to be careful. As I start to think about my overall vegan journey, one of the things I would say is I'm very low on corn, even though I'll sometimes eat corn. I'm also very low on potatoes, and I try to stay away from gluten as much as possible. And so these are just some of the things I try to keep in mind. Our last segment, we were getting into the biochemistry that goes into melanin and the dopaminergic system, essentially, which has to do with cognitive function. And so when you're eating good and you're also producing fascia, and you're cleaning your fascia by keeping what we call your greater momentum clean, right? So your gut health, right? You don't necessarily need to strive for six-pack abs, but having sort of a very strong relationship with what's going on in the organs that are within your midsection. That's a part of the process when you realize that there's such thing as keeping a positive BMI. There's such thing as looking at your body fat percentage. And so with fitness, these are all goals that we can then think through while we're also part of this vegan journey, right? And so just kind of throwing this all together, with regards to persons that are high in eumelanin, for example, eumelanin are persons who are most pigmented, right? Brown and darker complected people. Those individuals are going to have fast twitch muscles. And so as we're prioritizing fitness into our regimen, it's about higher response rates, right? And so all of the factors of health and well-being work hand in hand with each other, because you're cleaning your fascia, you are also making sure that you have the nutrients that are necessary to keep yourself balanced. But as I mentioned, you're also lowering your risk of metabolic diseases, right? So lowering the risk of heart disease, for example, diabetes, a lot of diseases that run rampant in our communities. And when we're thinking about ways that fitness, in addition to, let's say, a plant-based diet or incorporating a lot of plants into your diet, that relationship is going to be your best way of either preventing or working towards curing. Now, as I start to think about this larger conversation of persons who have been vegan, those who are pescatarian, those who are vegetarian. So for example, my mom is vegetarian, and when I went vegan, which was a journey and a process, and I talked in our last recording that this is my third time being vegan, but the most successful time. Now, my mom was originally a pescatarian, which meant that she would eat fish. And when I went vegan, she went vegetarian for the first time, and she's been vegetarian for quite some time. And so the difference between those different types of diets is that pescatarians will eat fish. So that's where pesca comes from. It has to do with fish. Whereas vegetarians are very similar to vegans, but you'll see vegetarians will also incorporate milk and dairy and eggs into their diet, where vegans are pretty strict against milk and dairy and eggs. And one of the reasons why you'll see that vegans are not using a lot of eggs is just because the animals that are producing the milk, whether it's goat milk or cow milk, they have something like morphine, right? There actually is the chemical morphine that exists in the system that they're producing, which helps their calf or helps their youth. And so those levels are actually really intended for their offspring and not for humans. And so when you're having that level of chemicals in your system, it's going to cause a reaction. So that's one of the reasons why vegans have shied away primarily from dairy, and it's worked tremendously for me. But there are some leaders in the conscious community in particular who really brought the conversation far along. So Dr. Laila Africa is somebody who had passed away in recent years. Of course, Dr. Sebi has always been huge in the health conversation. But more contemporarily, well, of course, another ancestor, Dick Gregory, is somebody who was huge in sort of the celebrity health conversation. And Queen Afua is somebody who also was on the sort of celebrity circuit of talking about health, veganism, and plant-based diet to a wide audience. But my herbalist, and somebody who I've been working with for a while, who makes my sea moss, who makes a lot of the different herbs that I take, is Dr. Inky, who's based in Detroit, and his website is AmericanHealer.website. Actually not .com, but .website. And so he's somebody who I've looked up to in the health community as somebody who's mixed herbs, who has had a major client base, and has written some books on health and well-being. So that's where a lot of the content that I'm drawing from is coming from. So he wrote about 60 books in the last year, which makes no sense possible, but it's happened, and they're all on Amazon. So if you look up Dr. Inky on Amazon, you'll see a lot about, wow, the cheese melter's doing its thing. You'll see the work that he's put out there. But generally, yeah, you have to give credit where credit is due, because we don't just happen upon all this information on our own, and there's more to the story at all given points. But generally, as we're thinking about health and well-being, some of the things we also need to think about are just having a positive relationship to rest, making sure that you're getting rest adequately, making sure that you're breathing, breath work. I mentioned yoga earlier, and that's one of the ways that I found myself in balance with my breathing routine, because all of these have a relationship to your greater health. We talked about cleaning the omentum, the greater omentum, which is your gut, having a positive BMI and a positive body fat percentage. So try to keep it below 30%. And my personal goal has been to keep my body fat percentage below 20%, right? And I have like trainers who are down to like 15 and less percentage than that. And that's always amazing to me, right? So these are just things to keep as personal goals. But overall, the larger message is just trying to find ways to add antioxidants, lowering the amount of inflammation, and just realizing that there's a relationship between some of what it is that are the chemicals, the biochemistry that makes up who we are, and how that implicates on these larger decisions that we make on a daily basis, whether it's the decision to go and get that exercise in, if it's the decision to get more rest, right? One of the things that I'm very big on is blue light toxicity. So I wear blue blocker glasses a lot of times when I'm going to be standing in front of a screen or in a situation where I'm in intense amounts of light, right? So there's a lot that goes into this health and well-being journey, and we're always trying to challenge ourselves to be our best selves at all given points, right? So getting rest, also breathing, also, as mentioned, being mindful of the amount of time we're spending outside. I like to practice earthing. So getting into soil or sand where your shoes are off, you're barefoot, and you're getting some of the ions that are in your body to exit from the body. And so having a relationship to the earth in that way, earthing or grounding is what some people call it. Having a personal garden and house plants are going to also clean the air in your house, right? So there are a ton of ways to keep yourself grounded in all manners. Now, one of my personal goals, and I mentioned this in our last filming, was that one of my things that I want to see myself get into is a family garden that is for the purpose of growing fruits and vegetables right at home. And so the community partner I mentioned with my community planning workshop that I'm teaching next semester at University of North Carolina, they have, in addition to their farm, they have their own personal family farm. So being able to be a primary source of your own plants and vegetables that you're growing for yourselves, like that's all about sustenance. It's also economic stability, right? If you're able to provide for yourself, because we can't always rely on the supermarket and the grocery store. And then there are economic implications to being able to essentially grow what it is that you're eating, that you're providing for your family and for your friends. And that's the whole idea behind this series of vegan barbecues that I've been hosting for the last few years, is just this larger conversation around, as I mentioned, generational health. And the more that I'm able to share what's working for me, it helps me to then see how other people are doing in their journey. And we'll compare notes. I will often, my students and even some of my coworkers think I'm a lot younger than I am. So that's one of the things, is like you can turn back the hands of time in terms of your youth. There are herbs and supplements that can help with the hormones. And so that's uber important, as mentioned earlier, that I use herbs from Dr. Inky, and a lot of his herbs are coming from Dr. Sebi, or he uses all of Dr. Sebi's herbs plus some, right? So many people don't realize that Sebi was not super big on melanin, right? And Sebi was also not huge into protein, right? And so I mentioned earlier that there are persons who are in the health community who've been talking about health, but maybe not the whole idea around calisthenics and muscles, and the fact that the body uses muscles to heal itself. And so it's very important, now that we're getting a better understanding of health and science, even the fact that we just recently realized that there are 3,000 more types of neurons than we previously know about. That's new science that wasn't even on anybody's radar. That tells you that there's so much more to know. And so it's not just about saying, hey, this person decades ago said this one thing. So that's always what I try to have this conversation with people who are following the alkaline diet. There is such thing as alkalinity, right? But there's more to maintaining alkaline than the conversations that were advanced maybe 10 or 15 years ago, right? Now, one of the questions that came up was around, what does a cheat day look like for me? And the reality is, I'm not one person who goes and seeks out a time to leave the vegan journey when it is that maybe once per year that I do. But I do have an elderly grandmother who, she's from Jamaica, and I talked about her in episode 1. If you guys go back, I talk about my Caribbean heritage as well as my African American heritage. But she will sometimes make some of the traditional dishes that will include fish. I mentioned I had forayed into pescatarianism, so I'll sometimes have seafood on like once a year occasion, or if it's going to be some kind of meat, it's not going to be a large consumption of that meat. So the reality is, what you're hearing me say is that you can decide to find yourself in this journey in a lot of different ways. You can try vegetarianism, you could even try veganism. You can make sure, if you're eating meat, that you're having more pigments, that you're having more hydration, that you're having more proteins that are balanced, including aromatic amino acids like you'll get from the plant kingdom. And if you're able to balance in these ways, you're going to find more energy, faster cognition, faster response times, right? And these are really goals when we think about the extent to which people are experiencing Alzheimer's and dementia in our communities. As mentioned before, we talked about heart disease and diabetes. So all these metabolic diseases, we're trying to lower the amount of inflammation in the body and create better health for our communities, because that is our time. That is our actual ability to stay here longer, right? If we can have a fountain of youth, if we can be here on this earth for decades longer, sometimes it's making these decisions on a daily basis that make that decision much easier, make the possibility or the capability for that happening to be more probable, right? So we'll be right back. Thank you guys. All right, and we're back. So we talked a little bit about gut health in our last segment. So our last portion of the meal is going to be pineapple. Pineapple is excellent for your gut health. Another thing that I like to integrate into my diet is yogurt, right? Now, I'm using dairy-free yogurt, which is primarily made up of coconut, or some of them are made up of different types of like either cashew, or even you'll see a lot of different other kind of nuts and seeds used to make vegan yogurt. And so there's just been big debate going on about probiotics versus prebiotics. The reality is there really aren't such thing as prebiotics. That's actually a new phase, a fad that came in relatively recently. But the reality of the situation is what you see as prebiotics are actually soil from the earth that people are using for the purpose of supplementing what people should already be having by getting fruits and vegetables that are coming straight out of the soil, right? So if you're gonna, some people are really big into kombucha. I used to be into fermented foods but shied away because I found that with gut health, it really doesn't take a lot much more than, in my case, a vegan yogurt. If you're not vegan, there are dairy yogurts that are going to give you the sustenance that you need in your system. So I did want to address gut health as a whole, but as mentioned here, in addition to pineapples, which are really good for your gut health, I'm also huge into coconut water. That is really replenishing for electrolytes. So I use a lot of coconut water, probably on a daily basis, if not every other day in my diet. And I'm also huge into, I talked a little bit about pumpkin seeds, but the actual pumpkin itself, pumpkin and squash, especially this time of year going into the fall and Thanksgiving season, it's really important to have pumpkin and sweet potatoes, right? So I did say I'm not huge on potatoes in general, but sweet potatoes do have a load of nutrients. And so as I'm talking through all of these different ingredients, you're hearing and thinking of the colors of the things that I'm talking about. And so having a balanced diet that's going to include a lot of different colors is going to be super, super important for you. Now, as I talk more about this design journey coming from our last episode where I was making furniture at a certain scale, I then started to scale up with the work. And so I'm really happy that I was able to make a chair in this last week. It's the first time I made a chair in about a couple of years. But I created a pavilion in Apalachicola, Florida, based on these kind of systems that I've been developing through looking at the connections of primarily plywood. But this pavilion space that I created was a large, giant sundial. And so I'm going to show some images of that, I think, later on. But ultimately, it was a community engagement tool for conversation with the local residents of Apalachicola, Florida. And so the whole conversation that's going on there has to do with changes and shifts in the climate that are just naturally occurring and some not naturally occurring. So their story is that there's damming coming from Georgia going into the river, and they're part of Florida. They're on the Gulf Coast, and they used to be the oyster capital of Florida and some of the best oysters in the country. Now, oysters don't have a central nervous system, so some people who are vegan will actually have an oyster or two. I'm not huge on them, but sometimes I consider them. Now, the story, though, is that the black residents of that community, right, have seen a lot of changes in their area, and they no longer have been able to use oyster harvesting as a mainstay, and oyster fishery has changed. There's been a moratorium on oyster fishery. And so the installation that I created for the residents in an African American Heritage Festival in February of 2023, this large sundial was sitting on top of a huge world map that I created that was an azimuthal map, so it was shifted to have Apalachicola at the center of the world. And the map was just as big as the sundial. Sundial was 10 foot tall and 20 feet wide. And on that map, I had people tell the story of their migration, of where they may have come from. So if they talked about where their families had come from, many of them had been in Florida their whole life. Their parents or grandparents had been in that part of Florida, but some were coming from Georgia, from Mississippi, from Louisiana. Some were coming from Northeast, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, California. But then as people are thinking about their story, and I had them use an oyster shell to demarcate on the map the locations that represented their story of migration, some people were in the military, some people were in the Peace Corps. There was a woman who was a politician who was from Apalachicola who told the story of all the countries that she had visited, which was in the tens, right? And so this whole idea of participating or participatory design has been something I've landed on as I've scaled up as now a public artist, right? It wasn't too long ago that I was like firmly entrenched into being an architect, working at architecture offices on world-class buildings and at some of the top design firms. But now as a professor, right, I found that my research has taken over. So there's the AI and jazz that we talked about, blending that with architecture, and now even the community planning aspect, but also the public art. And so the public art has been a really big new part of what I've been looking at as I've expanded. Now we talked a lot about cheat days and sometimes leaving the vegan journey and leaving the vegan diet, sometimes temporarily, sometimes not so temporarily. But in my experience, I haven't had negative reactions when I would go and have something that's outside of my vegan diet. Now, dairy, for example, I might get immediate inflammation. I might get a little congestion, and so that's something that I will say. But if it comes to like a fish or a meat, for some reason my body is able to take that in ways that I think some people who have gone on restrictive diets or have altered their way that they eat their food have had issues where they go back to for example, my partner, she has gone outside of veganism, and she said, no, you know what, 4 years in, we're going to stay with this. But I haven't had as bad of an experience leaving the journey from time to time. But the big elephant in the room is Dr. Elijah Muhammad talked about fasting, right? And so, like, as I was giving props to all these ancestors and all persons who have really brought the conversation in the Black community around health to light, right? We said that there are beans more than just navy beans and chickpeas, a lot of other different beans, but he was big on intermittent fasting. So when you hear people talk about some of the latest fasting trends, a lot of that's coming from Dr. Elijah Muhammad's work. So that's important to note that we've been looking at different ways to improve our health. Now, I'm not huge on fasting anymore, and I'll tell you why. When your body is depleted or deficient in one thing for an extended period of time, what ends up happening is that it's going to then try to balance it out with sugar in your system. So you will disrupt the balance of sugar in your system by fasting. Now, if you want to work on having your biggest meal of the day, like for example, people talk about the keto diet. If you want to talk about having a biggest meal of your day in the middle of the day, now that does work. And I think there is value in trying to not eat too late. Also thinking about your portions, not overeating. So you're not eating too late at night, right? So yeah, like there's such thing as portion control, thinking about the content of what you're eating, but generally you don't want to put yourself in a situation where you're going too long without eating. And so if I've been on a quote unquote fast, my fast would be that I'm going to stop eating at a certain time of day. So I'm going to eat up until 7 o'clock. I'm going to have my hydration and not drink too much water after a certain time of day. But I'm going to make sure on a daily basis throughout this fast, I'm going to have my fruits, I'm going to have my vegetables, I'm going to have my nuts and seeds, my pulse, as we talked about. And so all of these are going to help in that relationship between the heart and the brain. So we made a very quick allusion to that earlier in our conversation today. But generally, the melanin in our system, whether if it's pheomelanin or eumelanin, has a direct relationship with the AV node in the heart and the aorta, which is bringing blood between all of your different parts of your body, right? And so that AV node is what really gives you the beat. That beat of your heart actually has a relationship with the beat of your brain. And so the cognitive function, the ways that we're able to signal and process signals in our neurological system are all coming from this balance. And so if we're trying to find the relationship between melanin, which is a pigment, and we're eating pigments and nourishing that melanin, that's going to make sure that that beat stays constant, that your heartbeat is staying constant, that the brain is functioning at its maximum levels. So there is a ton of biochemical science that goes behind what we're talking about today. And I'm a designer, right? And delving into the world of public art, and also an architect and a professor. But as I now start to think about just generally how this dovetails into an overall lifestyle, I think some of the major benefits have been that I can't go to certain clubs without getting carded, or certain places without saying like, oh, aren't you, people think I'm 25, I'm turning 36 in less than 2 months, right? And so that's been really great to have the kind of energy where if I'm in the classroom with my students, I'm keeping up with them. Some of them think that I'm their age, and so those are some of the benefits that come with Vegan Journey. And as mentioned, I'm at the age where the testosterone levels start to drop. So we talked about supplementation, and we looked at the ways through which we can start to use herbs and herbal remedies to change the hormone balance in the body. So Dr. Rinke, once again, given credit, he's the one person who has a hormone helper with his system that I've been taking that works really, really well. And one other person I'm going to give credit to is my personal jeweler, Hank Rising Sun, who's in Brooklyn. And the pieces that I'm wearing today around my neck, these are orgone pieces, and these are all very, very custom. He's somebody that works with cash and money order these days, but has a huge following on his YouTube channel, Magnets, Crystals, and Pyramids, and also has a website, orgone4u.com. And generally on my end, right, I'm getting a little bit into the Instagram world, and we'll, figure out a whole way to plug handles and those kind of things. But yeah, all of this is just sharing that there's a community that goes into what it is that we do. So really big thanks to Marcus for making sure that we were able to put on another big show. I'm really pleased with how these grilled pineapples came out. These actually, in our case, are the dessert. If I grill them a little bit more, I'll make a decision on that. But what you guys are going to see very soon is the finished product of the burgers. Remember that we did the bean salad. We also had the cauliflower that was on skewers. So that combination is hitting all the pigments, it's hitting all the hydration that we need, it's getting those amino acids, especially the aromatic amino acids, it's getting fiber into your system, which is something very important that you get as a vegan and someone who is plant-based. Even if you're vegetarian, we got all the way into what's in milk, protecting your gut and your gut health, like yogurt, and yogurt is really huge because of the probiotics. And as a result, I think you got a lot of information, and we're gonna go to break. So we'll be right back.
Hello guys, we're back. Listen, we're at the end of the show. It was a long shoot, but it was so satisfying. We learned a lot, and we got a lot of information. Hal, let me have it.
Yeah, well, customary for what it is that I have set up as a tradition here. My shoots go from day into evening.
Yes, as you've seen before. But it's so much great information. It just happens that way. But we brought the perfect lighting, so we're good. So I'm going to try the burger
Excellent.
It looks really good. Oh, wow. Oh, that is really good.
Well, thank you.
That is really good. One more bite.
Awesome. Okay.
I'm not going to be greedy on camera and eat all the food.
Now, we ended up adding, as I talked about earlier, a few different types of raw food. So there are sprouts, there's romaine lettuce, there are heirloom tomatoes and pickles that we added in addition to the burger and its very special sauce.
Wow. Dude, that is really, really good.
Well, thank you.
I got to try pineapple. Whoa. Okay. I wasn't expecting that, and that's so. Is that just how it came out?
We marinated the skewer. So the pineapple wasn't just raw pineapple.
Okay.
There was a special sauce that was using vegan butter.
Yeah.
And a few other ingredients like cinnamon that helped it really
That's
come together.
what
So that's really the dessert item. It's the counterbalance.
Because that kind of hit me by surprise. All right, one more piece. Okay. I don't have a fork right now, so I'm going to get into this later.
Yeah.
But let me ask you some questions.
Sure.
What is one of the most misconceptions about veganism?
Yeah. You're absolutely right. I think that's a great question because people just think that with veganism that you've just got unlimited health. Just like with anything, it's very important. Portion control, watching your servings, understanding that although you are loading up yourself with nutrients, that you still have to watch your health, right?
Okay.
So I think people think that vegans have unlimited energy. I mean, I've had a lot of energy from the journey, but the reality of the situation is like there's a lot that goes into keeping yourself balanced. And so not going too far in, as I mentioned to you before, and during this conversation today, there are a lot of vegans who just take what it is that they had before they were vegan. If they, started out with the standard American diet, SAD, as that's acronymed, and then they'll say, oh, well, let's go for a vegan steak or vegan chicken and all these fake meats and soy, which I don't do a big soy, but when they're doing so, they're not getting that fiber in. They're not going and putting those pigments into the system. They're not getting raw vegetables into the diet. So in those cases, they might as well just be eating the meat.
Okay, yeah. Okay, I got what you're saying. Now, I'm going to ask you this question. This is your own personal journey.
Sure.
So 4 years ago when you started this journey, what's one of the first things you noticed when you started doing vegan?
Absolutely.
Like, what's one of the first things you was like, okay, what's one of the first things you noticed?
Thank you for that question. Yeah. So this is, as I think I mentioned in our last conversation with veganism, that this is my third time and most successful time being vegan.
Gotcha.
And so with this particular journey, it really just started with a fruit fast. And as I mentioned, my fasting isn't intermittent, and so I'm still eating up until a certain point.
Gotcha.
But it was only supposed to be 2 weeks at the beginning of actually the pandemic.
Okay.
And when I made that choice to try to keep myself in most optimal health, because in this case, health is of the utmost importance. Health is your wealth, health is your time, health is your ability to stay here. I had a lot more energy, and as mentioned before, I forayed into veganism a couple of times, but this was just, it was feeling better than the previous journeys. And so I think it was because I was thinking about the other nutrition that would be important and supplementing my diet. And so this time around, things just seemed to come into coordination. Things were feeling more balanced. So I was getting more energy with my fitness journey. And so as a result, what started with 2 weeks has now turned into 4 years.
Wow.
I wasn't expecting that, but here we are.
Well, let's talk about weight loss.
Sure.
How that comes into play. Does that go hand in hand with veganism? Like if I start, am I gonna start seeing like weight loss or?
So that's why I'm always pushing this conversation on fitness, because losing weight per se is not always everybody's intended target. Some people have too little weight. But muscle is what's important, and building muscle. Now, if you are overeating in the vegan diet, if you are having a lot of soy in the vegan diet, then you can actually gain weight. I've seen vegans gain weight. So
Really?
people don't realize that just because you made the decision to go plant-based
Wow.
doesn't always mean that A, you're healthy, and B, that you're watching your servings, watching your portions.
Okay.
So there are nuances to the conversation, but all you're going to hear me say is that that fitness component is really going to be your bread and butter, because that's what's going to allow you to move lymph through your system.
Got you. It's funny because it's not really a question for you, but I just came back from the doctor, got the colon checked, everything was good, but he's like, you got to go on a plant-based diet. That's hard. And so,
yeah.
but what I learned from you, there are ways that to balance it out.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I'm excited about that. Would you recommend, like, I mean, did it work for you when you and your partner did it like together, like
Yeah.
that kind of like
Accountability.
Yeah.
That was a big part of it. Sure. The fact that we're both preparing meals.
Yeah.
We actually prepare meals more than we go out to
Really?
eat. Oh yeah. And so I'm now in Charlotte, and Charlotte has a good food scene, but when I was in Tallahassee, there weren't a whole lot of great vegan restaurants. So we had to learn how to cook for veganism. And as mentioned, when we go to family outings and nobody else is vegan, we gonna have to bring our own vegan food
Even
to
to this
those
day?
trips.
Wow.
Yes,
Wow.
yeah. So that's something that I always have is the opportunity to learn how to prepare different meals like what we saw today, and that's what's helped me to stay balanced, especially when things get economically strained.
Yeah. It's funny. And you also was talking about jumping. When you do kind of jump off the vegan diet and
That's
eat
right.
regular food. What happened with me, and this was for like a good year. I stopped eating red meat. 2
Okay.
years. I had a barbecue. I had a Frank, and my body rejected it. And I know you said that doesn't happen to you.
Well, it's not shocking. A Frank would be a lot to have after no meat for a long time.
Okay, that might be what happened there because my body just rejected it, and it was just really, really it wasn't pretty.
That's right.
But I do myself, back to the diet, I do have to change the diet. I don't know if I can go plant-based. But I can eat healthier.
Absolutely.
This episode was tremendous.
Thank you so much.
When you come on, we have like a pad and paper because we're always learning stuff from you.
Many thanks.
And
thanks.
I just, I'm glad you're back on this show.
Glad to be here.
And we have to definitely do it again. Listen.
Let's get this man a fork.
Yes, you got to get me a fork, and we got to close out the show as it's getting dark. You know how it is. We go from day to night.
That's right.
Like we did before, but it's so informative, and it's so worth it, and it's just everything. Once again, like I said, that award I received that you saw earlier was from this man in his episode, and so I so appreciate that. Listen, when she no longer wants to cook for you, Kyle today showed us what to do, vegan style.
Absolutely.
Listen, we're out of here. Have a good night, guys.
Take care, guys.